And in law, one of the things that I learned amongst many really universal principles is that in law, there always must be a remedy. And this is very key, both in terms of studying law, applying it to what one wants to achieve. Most people want to achieve in law or studying and applying law, they want to achieve what we call freedom,
Mhm.
right? I want to be free. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to, have all of these restrictions and all that. I want to be free. But most people don't know how to be free.
Mhm.
Most people are too programmed to really integrate a true sense of freedom. And freedom is not just being the lack of um, uh, debt or the lack of having money, which most people have translated. And I've watched this for 35 years. Most people translate, the so-called sovereignty movement, the law movement, the freedom movement. Sooner or later, it boils down to I just want to have no debt. I want to have money. I want to have my piece of land and I want to live free. Okay.
Right.
But that's where the inner work comes in.
Mhm.
How can you live free if you've got all these entanglements, if you've got these traumas from this current lifetime, in your early childhood or during the whole course of your life in this embodiment? And how can you be free if you don't even know who you are in the larger whole of multiple lifetimes lived in this holographic reality that we call a world and don't know how they relate. They don't know, you don't know how it relates to events that have happened in your life. And if you don't know how those things influence and inform those events, you can't face them, you can't resolve them, and you can't really come to a balanced point in your life. So that's part of freedom too.
Very
That's why
much.
we have now launched what we call freedom absolute, because freedom is not just one point of focus, like I just described. It's if you really want to be free, it is a state of being that is absolute. And it covers all the subjects that we've been talking about. So going back to that fundamental in law, that in law, there always has to be a remedy. So if you truly integrate, you grasp, you study, you grasp, and you integrate how law really works, how it is set up on this planet, and how it is mirrored or reflecting something in the larger whole of what we could call universal law, and understanding the nature of remedy. This is fundamental, and this is some of the key things that we do teach and work with every day, every week, every year with our members and the people who have come aboard and be part of the society. So, so in that context, that underwrote a really deep dive into this thing we've been talking about. What is the nature of evil? What is the nature of the reality that we're in? Where does, quoting, talk about philosophy? How many philosophers for thousands of years have been trying to answer the question, where does evil come from? Okay. So, but if you integrate all those points I just made about law always has a remedy, that it's synergistic and it's whole, that freedom is not an isolated thing, but it's your whole being in all aspects of who we really are. And then asking, what is the nature of the larger whole of the reality we're in on a solar system level, a galactic level, a universal level, a multiverse level, and all of that? Well, what we have come to know, and this is for us, this is our knowing. It's not what I believe, it's what we know from our experience of multiple decades of immersion in all of this, is that we are in a specific universe, a specific expression of a collective of creation that is, as you use the word individuating, there's an individuating aspect of a whole universe. And there's an individuated aspect of each individual being, you and me, and those beings we call bipedal hominid humans on this planet. We are individuated. We came from the one, the whole, the source, but we're not separate from it. We've never been separate. We've been immersed in the illusion of polarity, binary coded separation, and all of that. And the work is really peeling all that off and discovering our real wholeness, our whole being, and our interconnectedness. So, as an individuated expression of all of creation, this universe you could describe as an experiment.
Mhm.
So what's the data set of the experiment? Well, the fundamental is it's a universe that has been established or founded upon the principle of sovereign free will. That each individuated expression, each individual, you, me, and all beings with an individuated but still source connected expression of their life, that we are hardwired as free will, sovereign free will beings. So in the study of law and the freedom movement and everything, what's the buzzword? What's it been for the whole time I've been doing it, 35 years? Sovereignty. I want to be a sovereign, you know. Well, that's another bait and switch of the
Yep.
the cabal. It's the same cabal that created the phrase conspiracy theory. They also promoted in the New Age movement, in the law movement, and all the offshoots of that, this thing called sovereignty. I want to be a sovereign, but that's a misdirection. We can get into why in a moment.
Mhm.
But fundamentally, there is this thing that we all hold as our true being, which is sovereign integrity, which means a whole being, an integer, like you said, an integral whole. Like you said, well, the number one is still a whole number.
Mhm.
Well, it's an integral or an integer. And all the mind stuff that we've gone into through the AI and this vast reality of everything from quantum physics to technology, computerization to what is called science. It's all fragmentation through a distortion and a manipulation of the mind to get it to be able to be controlled and occupied by the AI construct that is really in the reality that we're being in at the moment. But underlying that is sovereign free will. We have sovereign integrity and we have sovereign free will. So when you study law, one of the things that you first can see that I saw many years ago, and I started working on that basis and moving forward with it, is that everything in this world system is based on the fact that even the cabal cannot, um, uh, um, you know, reject or eliminate sovereign free will. So what they have done is they've created this vast multi-structured, multi-layered, complex structure in which they get everybody to volunteer to become bonded as the bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise, to a system of perpetual debt bondage into eternity, and ultimately volunteer to be co-opted by their technology with the injection and all of what's in there now to interface with a binary coded computerized AI system to then voluntarily agree and consent to go into the transhumanistic endless, infinite future of what the mind will say, I'm free, but in reality is complete bondage, but by voluntary consent.
Mhm.
So that's a fundamental in law that you have to look at. When you see that everything is actually on voluntary consent and basically based on the nature of contract, that we contract and we enter into a reciprocal relationship to either one individual or a group or a whole system, we are essentially still asserting or utilizing our sovereign free will to voluntarily enter into contracts that have reciprocal benefits and privileges, but then basically end up being perpetual bondage.
Mhm.
So those are two fundamentals in law that so much is built on. The nature of voluntary consent, sovereign free will, and the nature of contracts, and the fact that law always has a remedy. So if you want to be free, what we do and we teach and we walk people through what I labeled status correction, and I was the first to bring that phrase forward like 12 to 14 years ago. It's been mimicked and replicated in many, many ways, but none of what I've ever seen out there goes to the core of the whole integration, freedom absolute at all levels of how one can truly become corrected in one's status and remove that voluntary consent, the presumption of consent upon which we are acted through everything we do every single day in the legal and the monetary system. And if we created something, we have the remedy within ourselves to uncreate it and to, close out the contracts, both legally speaking, lawfully speaking, and multidimensionally speaking, because we all carried vast amounts of contracts and agreements into this life that we have to start really unwinding.
Mhm.
And we have to face them. Well, in studying law, you come to understand how we have the power and the capacity to do that. And that's a big part of our work.
That's brilliant. And do you get into the double entry accounting system with the heavenly realm and ecclesiastical realm and how that connects to the debits and credits for the soul?
Well, that's a very good question. I saw you in your book that I started reading. You had double entry book, and the last word started with a C, but I was thinking that it should be double entry book trust. And that spells the word debt. I know you like anagrams the way
Hmm.
I do.
Yeah.
And so, um, so if it's a double entry book trust, then that mimics or it reflects the binary coding of this control matrix reality. Okay,
Hmm.
so what is double entry? So that can be seen directly reflected in what's called general accounting principles and procedures, or GAAP, and the debit and the credit side. It can be seen in the
Yeah.
roots or fundamentals of religion in the Western Judeo-Christian religion that focuses on this guy hanging from a cross and dying, and that supposedly he paid all your sins and paid all your debts. It doesn't work that way. But that, the cross that is used in Christianity is really a box. If you take squares and you create that cross and you fold them in, it creates a box. Well, that's one of the five Platonic solids. So you get into geometry, what people called sacred geometry, that's been promoted in the New Age for the last 30, 40 years, which is another bait and switch and rabbit trail that hooks the mind and is not really what's really going on. It's part of the prison that we're in. But the actual physical cross that was used back then in Roman times was more of a T. It was, a crossbar sitting on top of a vertical that was put into the ground. Well, where else do we see a crossbar and the vertical? In accounting, debits and credits. You
Hmm.
have the left side is debits, on the right side is credits. And in accounting, that is used in all business and accounting and taxes and everything. It's basically a zero sum. You have to come to a zero sum, that the left side must be balanced or mirrored and reflected in the right side. So the left side is the debit side, it's the debt side, it's the death side, it's the public side. Before Alice went in the mirror and went into Wonderland, and it's where the mirrored reflection of the true template of life really is outplayed in our physical sensory reality that we see, whether we see it in physical form or electronic form. And it's all a mirrored illusion or a mirroring obverse of what the life template really is.
Hmm.
On the other side is the equity side, is the living substance side. Well, when you study law, you study accounting, you study the monetary system, you study how monetary issue from central banks and how the bondage system works through all of that, currency and contracts and all the rest of it, that you see that it is a zero-sum game. It's mirroring the credit or the equity. But we're not allowed to, in our current status, we're not allowed to access that. The system accesses it, and it mirrors everything on the public side, on the debt side, or the double entry side. So on the right side is where the equitable interest, the real value, the substance of our life, the substance of our creator capacity, where it's been captured by voluntary consent. We allowed it. We continue to allow it every single day. And on the debt side, they mirror that and they create debt that reflects that equity. But we're trapped on that debt side. So there's a double entry book trust because a trust is also a split reality. It's a split title where the trustee holds legal title, but the beneficiary has the beneficial interest or the equitable interest. But in legal terms, in a trust, the trustee can control everything on the legal side, can manipulate everything, can manipulate it to his or its or her benefit, and ultimately suck the life force out of the beneficiary until there's nothing left. So it's all the same thing, whether you look at money, you look at legal structure, you look at the issue of status, you look at how bondage occurs with legal and monetary structure, or you look at, spiritual context of what a double entry book trust or debt really is. So that being said, can you define for me what you just said of the different, what you said, the heaven and the ecclesiastical? I'd like to know how you see that, and then we can discuss that because that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so it's basically what you're saying with the debt and credit side being the two sides of the pyramid of trust. And so, first position, second position, third position, each of those within the trust being offices. The first office being the properia persona or the proper face that we show in the public. And I refer to actually, I call it hourglass as like the figure of an hourglass, but in the top half of hourglass is our life, force energy that then gets drained into the public, which is what I refer to as high rose prism. And then the trust actually has a front face and a back face, from what I have come to believe, based on the king who has the queen at the back side. So your ROI or your wa has your ren, which is why I believe that sovereignty is actually putting us under true queen. So it's just monarchism or royalism in another package. And then you have the knight and the bishop characters as the A side or the air side of the law, the waters of the king and queen being the warring waters of commercialism and how we're incorporated into the public. And then you have the land as the front is the pawn who gets played and told what to do by the king or
Mhm.
directed by his knight, who is then able to act as the villain, which was an upper class peasant that then had to be a villain in some peasant or pauper's life on command from the king. And then at the back side of the pawn, you have the domain of the castle or the rook character, if we bring in the law as a chess game. And then that prism being the prison of the mind that actually incorporates us into Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp's house, which is a memnonic to actually know that we're in la maison d'être, where we become debtors because we become the thing we were doing before then we took on the title that made us beneficiary instead of the one who benefits. The one who benefits holds first person office of the properia persona of a man of competent capacity. And then the third person is where we're relegated when we don't take back command from what I understand, and this is I am still needing to get this where, and this is why I love being able to say it with you. But the ancestral lineal estate is where the first person office is held by the Vatican through the 1666 Sesta Trust Act. Sesta being who was actually saying, I'm going to need somebody to look after my stuff while I'm at war or away from home. So that's going to be entrusted to the Sesta trust, which doesn't have V in it because V is life and evil is live backward. And that's my definition of the real binary that we're in, which goes back then to Socrates. What is real or unreal? Well, evil is just live backwards. And the
Mhm.
devil lived in the stories where he is spoke of as if he is a real character. So to go into the double entry accounting system, and to say that in the top half is the heavenly realm and the bottom half is the ecclesiastical realm, what that means is in the real life of hourglass of life, we actually have debits or debts that we create between one another that then need to have that karma cleared between us, who are the ones that have the issue with one another, and that's credit. So that's where forgiveness is offered in exchange for the debt that happened when something didn't work out. And that's heavenly because it's private. And the Greeks refer to that as the sanctum sanctorum, of the secret chamber of the heart space that is no one's business unless we confide in them and share what is private. And then that is done through the intercessor, which the Pope was made to be the intercessor for humanity, because humanism is how transhumanism is added on to the concept that we're incorporated into without it necessarily needing to include each of us who are still able to exist separate from this concept we're then implied to be part of. And that's part of the incorporation. But that is really actually very relevant to the ecclesiastical realm, because that's where we cashed in our debts to get debit from the church to offer us a credit in the form of a certificate or some kind of promise note, notary promise or promissory note being what our money is based off of. And that was issued when we converted and cashed in so that we could get through St. Peter's pearly gates, which then brings the church into what was private but now was made public through a private intercessor.
Wow, that's great.